offer a benefit that you have to pay for, not very many people pay for it. They'd rather just wait until they're sick. So the Republican plan, the CBO found, was only going to cover 4 or 5 million of the 40 to 45 million uninsured. If you want to get to the 31 million number, which is what Obama wanted, that's where you end up with the big government plan. Look, people forget, in '97, Republicans and Democrats had a compromise on health care. It was called the CHIPS plan. It covered every child in America at 300% or below of poverty. And this was a huge number of minority and lower middle class and lower income people who had never had coverage for their children before. And it was a Republican plan that Clinton and Gingrich and Kasich negotiated. So it's possible to do, but I don't think you can cover 31 million people. Yes?
The Tea Party hasn't been focusing on Christian values or family values.
Right.
What do you see as the future of the Christian church in politics in America?
That's a great question. My sense is that, as is the case with all great social reform movements, civil rights, feminism, any movement that takes people who were previously marginalized and then gradually midwives them into a central role in mainstream politics, is you really have a series of kind of transitionary vehicles and personalities. In the case of the civil rights movement, obviously, it was, Martin Luther King, primarily, but not exclusively. Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael. There were a whole lot of those personalities. And in the case of feminism, it was Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, and I could name many others. They're path breakers. And once you break that resistance to this constituency having a role, I don't want to say they blend in completely, but they no longer have their noses pressed against the glass of the culture. I mean, you have to remember, under Bush, you had an evangelical Christian who had written speeches for Chuck Colson, namely Mike Gerson, as the chief speechwriter and senior policy advisor to the President of the United States. These are not just people kind of, coming out of the swamp, thumping Bibles and saying, somebody listen to me. This has now been going on for 25 or 30 years. They've been chiefs of staff to members of Congress. They've been state party chairs. They've been national committee men and women. They're thoroughly embedded in the machinery of American politics. It really doesn't bother me at all that the Tea Party movement is focused more on government spending and the role of government and returning to a more constitutionally defined government. I think that's how they were birthed, and that ought to be their main focus. I recently last year, I founded an organization called the Faith and Freedom Coalition, which is designed to bring together and synergize the faith-based vote of evangelicals and pro-family Roman Catholics and other people of faith with the more liberty-oriented, freedom-oriented, less government crowd. And we're now up and operating in 15 states. In Virginia and New Jersey, we did about 4.5 million voter contacts. And the exit polls showed that in both Virginia and New Jersey, we had the largest turnout of religious conservative voters in either state in the modern era. So I'm very optimistic about the future. Now, you don't have the moral majority in the Christian coalition out there as the lightning rod much anymore. But, like I said, once you've finished that booster rocket phase, you really don't need that anymore. I mean, you've got so many, just to give an example, not just Barack Obama, but all the African Americans that are active in American politics, serving in office, senior policy roles. It's so far removed from the beginning days of the civil rights movement, and that's as it should be. You stand on their shoulders. They bled and paid the price that you might, be there. And that's what's happened with the religious conservative and pro-family movement. Yeah, let me get somebody I haven't gotten yet. Yes, ma'am.
Could you please make an argument against gay marriage for me?
if you insist. You know, I believe that an intact, loving family based on a marriage between a man and a woman is the most effective and efficacious institution for wealth creation, enculturation, socialization, and the bearing and rearing of children. I think that is historically true. I think it's a sociological fact. I don't think that's a position based on my ideology or my theology. I think we know that has generally been the case. So my view in support of marriage being defined as it has historically been defined doesn't have anything to do with antipathy towards anybody who is gay or lesbian. I feel just as strongly, for example, that the no-fault divorce movement that swept the country in the 1970s did a disservice to marriage. I believe that marriage, as it has historically been defined, is the central and the most important socializing institution in a free society. And I want to see that ideal upheld and strengthened in our law. Now, there are going to be a lot of people, heterosexual and gay, who are going to choose, they're going to make other choices. And that's their right in a free society. But I believe as a matter of law, as a matter of custom, and as a matter of what we ought to uphold as the ideal, that should be the case. Yes, ma'am.
Do you feel that your personal belief when it comes to gay marriage should be what drives your, you know, how you, I don't know, what drives how you politically approach your politics, basically? Like, you say you believe that the standard definition of marriage should, like, you know, be upheld according to your belief, but do you think that should, you know, be a part of your politics in terms of the general American public? Like, do you feel that's what's best for the general American public just because it's your belief?
Well, I think every issue at some point becomes a moral issue in the sense of being our understanding of right and wrong. You know, people who come into politics to redress what they believe is inequities in the distribution of wealth do so because they think it's morally wrong for some people to aggregate all the wealth in a society and for other people to have little or nothing. Okay, they're making a judgment about right or wrong. There are many people that I have a lot of respect for, even though I don't share their politics, who do so from a biblical standpoint. Okay, so they go back as liberals and as believers in, for lack of a better term, the social gospel. And they base that belief on either verses from Scripture in the New Testament or Old Testament about caring for the poor and about addressing concentrations of wealth. I have no problem with that. I don't see why that's wrong. Why would I say to you, you can take a position on the tax code or the war on terrorism or marriage or abortion or health care based on any belief you want to, except a belief that derives from your theological worldview? Why would I say that? Because if I'm going to do that, I have to take an X-Acto knife and a pair of scissors to the pages of history, and I have to remove from the pages of history Pope John Paul II's condemnation of Soviet communism. I have to remove the condemnation of slavery by Christian preachers who said that it denied the essential rights of children of God who were made in God's image. You have to remove the civil rights movement. You have to remove the anti-war movement. Who were the Berrigan brothers but Catholic priests who thought that war was immoral and wrong? Now, I may disagree with their position, and I have to come up with my own reasons why I take my position. But I would never say that anybody is excluded or doesn't have the same right to the same seat at the table in a debate because their view derives from their faith. I just think that's wrong. I mean, does that mean that a Christian or a Jew who believes that God gave Israel to the Jews is excluded from being involved in the debate over Israel? Now, I may disagree with their position, but I wouldn't tell them ipso facto that's an irrational basis for your opinion.